Hello and welcome to Bitcoin with Jake. I'm talking with Hodlonaut. Hodlonaut, welcome. How are you?
Thank you, Jake. I'm good, thank you.
I'm hoping I pronounced that correctly. You told me just before the call started like an astronaut, so hopefully close enough. So this show is all about people's personal journeys to Bitcoin, and I'd really love to find out about yourself and what you're involved in the present day, and then we'll take a look back and see how you got to where we are now. So could you give me a brief rundown as to the projects you're involved in at the moment?
At the moment, like my main Bitcoin related project is a magazine called Citadel 21, which I work on and release with my fiancée Bitcoin Katja. So we had that magazine running for a couple of years now. It started off as just an online publication where we invited what we refer to as, savage Bitcoiners, the real plebs, the non-influencers, the beating heart of Bitcoin, basically, to share their signal in this magazine in a very unedited and raw fashion. And after a while, there was a lot of demand for a physical version of this scene, so we started publishing it physically. So and we sell it exclusively for Bitcoin. So if you're listening to this and want to check it out, you can find the magazine at citadel21.com. Apart from that, like unfortunately, a lot of my time is spent these days dealing with the lawsuits from a certain individual in this space.
That doesn't sound too much fun. Do you want to expand on that at all, Hodlonaut, or?
Yeah, I can expand on that to a certain degree. I would think a lot of your listeners are aware of this. It's an individual called Craig Wright, Australian, living in the UK at the moment, claiming he is the inventor of Bitcoin, that he is Satoshi Nakamoto. Back in 2019, I was very vocal about these claims on Twitter, and he and his entourage decided to make an example out of me to chill free speech on this subject. And UK is pretty famous for its libel laws. Unfortunately, it's actually become a political topic lately because of Russians suing journalists and other people, like people with a lot of money, basically trying to silence critical voices through the UK legal system with their libel laws. Because if you have deep pockets, you can go after anyone for the most frivolous reason and threaten them with bankruptcy and through the court systems. But it's so expensive to defend yourself in the UK, so most people will just fold and give in to whatever demands the litigator has.
Wow, I'm sure there's a lot more detail to that story. Let's park it for now. Thank you for explaining that. Is there anything else you're involved in on a kind of day-to-day process at the moment that you want to mention?
I would say just shit posting on Twitter is has been my main occupation in the Bitcoin space for the last 4 years. I was working full-time directly in the Bitcoin space up until like half a year ago. I was head of technology in a company called CT, which was started by Acre, which is a huge company here in Norway that decided to get into Bitcoin. I'm not there at the moment, so I guess at the moment I'm trying to tie up loose ends in my life, like the lawsuit, before I take on any other big responsibilities at the moment.
Wow. Okay, yeah, I'm sure we can get into all of that. It doesn't well, the way that you've outlined it so far, it sounds like it's been tough, and I have personally no experience of what it feels like to be under pressure in some kind of lawsuit situation. As I mentioned, if we may, we'll leave that to the side for now and rewind and find out a bit more about. I mean, you've already mentioned Norway. Could you share with us as much as or as little as you like about what early life was like for yourself? And I guess where I'm trying to get to is what type of character you were growing up. And I find often there's a lot of similarities between the type of characters Bitcoiners are, but that will hopefully come through in the stories you tell. So yeah, what was it like growing up?
Yeah, I think you have an interesting, like, I think this is interesting. I enjoyed listening to people's journeys as well. So I'll try to give an outline of my own. I got into technology pretty early. It was, you know, so sometimes you find things that really speak to you that you just completely fall in love with. And I have a background that's like very much of an outdoorsman. My dad took me into the forest a lot. I was fishing, spending days and weeks outdoors just in sleeping bags or tents and cabins. So I had that like side of me. I was also very much into sports. I played football and this version of ice hockey we have in Norway called bandy. But then at around 10 years of age, I guess, I managed to pressure my parents into buying me a Commodore 64 and 8-bit computer, which was a big investment for our family back then. So, and I just fell in love with it. I started programming a little bit, you know, pirate copying all the games on these cassette tapes. So that was the start of my computer journey, which just, you know, kind of escalated, or it totally became my main interest, I would say. So I later got an Amiga 500, then an Amiga 1200, then a PC, like a 386 PC, and so on and so on. I got a modem very early, like before internet was a thing. So I started communicating with people through these bulletin board systems, to my mother's great despair, because the phone line was always busy with these crazy sounds.
What's going
from
on back
the modem.
there? Nothing, Mom,
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah, and you know, the phone bills weren't always nice as well. So yeah, and then when internet arrived, I was very much into file sharing, both, you know, initially through Napster and other systems like that. But then BitTorrent came along, which fascinated me a lot. And I used the different BitTorrent sites a lot for, you know, games and software of all kinds, movies, music. So I was pretty familiar with the BitTorrent technology, and I think all of this served as a backdrop for when I actually discovered Bitcoin, because the peer-to-peer nature of it was kind of familiar territory for me. And when you pair that with the crazy insight that there was only ever going to be 21 million of these coins, and at that time I also had discovered certain things about how money comes into existence in the fiat system, and different types of corruption that's going on there. So yeah, I was very much like Bitcoin was like something that waited to happen for me, I think, or I was very much able to appreciate it when I found it, I think.
And what I love about that, and I talk about this a lot, but it's in school, you're taught like cheating is bad. So you're not allowed to look at someone else's notes. And it has merit in a sense, because you need to think for yourself and understand what you're being taught. Putting aside the discussion as to whether or not the academic system teaches anything of value whatsoever. And as an adult, you know, especially as an investor, leveraging other people's work who you trust and admire as investors is actually a good thing to do, and helps you to make better investment decisions. And so when I hear someone like yourself that, you know, 10 years old is bloody early to be talking about, you know, getting stuck into computers, and obviously a huge passion in your teenage years, to see Bitcoin for what it is very quickly is something that I'm then able to resonate with and go, oh, that's interesting. Because I wasn't someone that had a computer age 10, 12 and started programming. But I love technology and what it can do. I just don't have the skills to dig into it and understand how it works. So I always need people like yourself to sit alongside and go, okay, if you trust it and you believe it's actually, you know, as innovative as it might be, great, that's a big tick. I can, you know, continue to investigate further, and it deepens my conviction. So that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. Before we dig into that a little more, you mentioned, you know, the internet came along and you're talking about clogging up the telephone line. We've become so used to using digital products that our lives are online the whole time. Can you rewind and just remind us what it was like back then online? Like, what did you do every day? What could you use it for? What were some of the pioneers, you know, describing it as its best use case might be, or the projections on its adoption in the future?
Yeah, I have to like go past when the internet arrived here in Norway and back to these bulletin board systems, because to me they were very much like the
and if I may, sorry, Hodlonaut, roughly when was this? So you're talking like early 1990s or?
Yes, like
Okay.
I think I probably started messing with this BBSs, the bulletin board systems, very late 80s.
Okay.
And then for a couple of years after that, until I'm not completely sure when we first were able to connect to the internet in Norway, but probably it was like 92 or something like 93.
Okay.
I'm not completely sure. Maybe a little bit later.
Not to totally dox your age per se, but roughly how old were you at the time? Like in your teenage years, or?
Yes, in my teenage years. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a grip for, like, you know, everyone who is older than a teenager can relate to what it was like as a teenager. You know, we're very inquisitive. We're learning a lot about the world all at the same time, and people just fall down mad rabbit holes when they're in that kind of state of being. So I can resonate as to what you probably felt like at the time. Awesome.
Yeah.
Carry on where you were.
Yeah, and just a side note on the rabbit holes. I think you were mentioning like if there is something that's typical for Bitcoiners, and I think to have this open, inquisitive mind is very typical for Bitcoiners, and
Correct.
you know, the ability to independently process and verify information and topics of interest, and not just, you know, follow the herd on every matter. So yeah, but the experience of these bulletin board systems, to me, for some reason, it was so mind-blowing to me that I was able to communicate with them, because up until then I had spent a lot of time in front of computers, and it was always just me communicating with the computer. There was never a human element on the other side of the keyboard. So suddenly to be on these bulletin board systems, and they worked like there were anywhere from 1 and up to like 4 or 5 phone lines into this system. So you, in some of these bulletin boards, you could meet other people there at that time, and then you could chat with them. And just to be able to have a conversation with someone through the keyboard, to me was for some reason super magical and amazing, that I could, you know, communicate verbally through my keyboard with a person, and you could share files. There were these discussion forums on these bulletin board systems that that one bulletin board shared with other bulletin boards, so that they could synchronize across a lot of different systems, so that you could, it of course wasn't real time, but then you connected to a bulletin board system and downloaded a file, and then you read it offline, and you could basically hold conversations with a community of people on different topics. So I think communication with other people and the ability to, you know, pirate copy a new computer game, even though it took probably 4 hours of time to download this game of a 1 megabyte size. So yeah, communication and sharing software was the big things for me initially. And then when the internet itself arrived, that was like bulletin board systems on steroid. Everything was actually happening real time. There was no, like, everyone was connected at the same time. So then it went really fast, of course. But for me, I think the ability to communicate with other people was always the hugest thing with the internet, to share information.
And it's so cool to try and, for myself, so I was born in the late 80s, so I was a very small child at this stage, and the idea that like chatting through a keyboard was magic is completely and utterly foreign to me, because it's just something that, you know, I was 10 years old in the late 90s, and the internet, you know, .com bubble happened, and you know, we kind of grew up on computers in comparison, in a sense. And it's cool to think like there always has been, you know, these moments where you end up building on top and building on top and building on top. And you know, it in some senses, Bitcoin looks like this kind of crazy innovation that's come out of nowhere, but actually when you start researching it, it's, you know, 40-50 years worth of work that finally someone just got the right piece of ingredient at the right time, and it's taken off. And that's also a very comforting story to dig into when you do, as it's a really obvious kind of, oh, well, surely it doesn't work. It can't be like the first one that only ever works. And it's that kind of process of like, well, actually, at some point, even chatting on a keyboard was a big deal. And do you know what I mean? It's this whole like building, you know, gradually and compounding the value of something on top of itself. And I agree, like communication, like what an incredible tool. Like in some ways, podcasts, you know, how would humans for many, many generations have retained knowledge? Well, through speech. And, you know, you sit around a campfire and talk about, you know, history or whatever the case might be. And in some senses, like podcasting now is like that. You know, you can burrow down into the most niche of campfire on any subject you want. Gosh, how cool. I'll stop ranting. It's already, this is a fascinating conversation already. Okay, cool. So you're a teenager, you're experiencing all of these interesting trends and technological innovations. Where did that take you?
It was very easy for me to conclude at the time that obviously, because everyone around me, like the old system around me, my parents, my friends, my teachers, everyone was, it was all about education, right? Like you needed to get an education because you needed to work. You have to find work. And I was for the longest time, you know, my dad especially was always telling me, you need to stop wasting your time with these fucking computers. Like it's not gonna, it's a fad, it's a toy. It's like not part of the real world. You need to like, you know, the idea that this was gonna somehow turn into a skill that you could monetize or live from was just completely alien to anyone back then. You know, it was just, my parents' view of computers was just a waste of time that I played games on, pretty much. So it was funny to see, like, fast forward 20 years and like have both of my parents calling me all the time to help me fix their computer issues in different ways, you know. But yeah, I decided pretty early on that of course computers, technology, that's what I need to, you know, study and work with, because this is really interesting.
And to be fair to your father, I imagine that, given you mentioned you were, you know, passionate about spending time outdoors and camping and whatever else, like if that was his, you know, pastime as well, it was even more foreign to think that, you know, a computer might actually generate some kind of like long-term employment value. And that's 100%. Totally reasonable, right? Okay, cool. So you're like, cool, I'm going into technology as a career. So did you go and get any formal education, perhaps as a university somewhere, or what was the 90s like in terms of trying to find a job in the tech space?
Yeah, I actually spent my 90s. I didn't get into my higher education in the 90s. I was a little, like, just about too young for that. I was in the army, spent the year in the army.
Okay.
I got work for an airline of all things, spent a couple of years there, and I traveled a little bit. But then I got started on my higher education just as we entered the 2000s, and I got a computer degree at the university in Norway, and I very quickly found work as a system developer in a very what was back then a very good company here in Norway. So I worked as a system developer for a couple of years, coding basically. But but I very quickly lost it. It very quickly ended up removing all the magic of technology for me, that job, because I was working on, we were developing automatic invoice processing software. It was just absolutely boring and like removed from anything I was interested in, basically. I wasn't interested in just coding for coding's sake. That was never me. I wanted like to do something that was driving me a little bit. So that removed the magic of
sorry, Hodlnaut, just to jump in.
Yeah.
When you say you want to do something that was driving you more, can you just focus on what that really means to you?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think I was aware of it back then. I don't think I was conscious about what would really drive me. I just realized that this was not driving me. But from what I've learned now, I mean, it's all about something that resonates with me, something that brings forth enthusiasm in me. And that can be, creating positive change, making products that somehow like brings something forward that I find interesting to share. I think it's related to information sharing, basically, that there is so much cool shit in the world, and I want to make other people aware of the cool shit. Something like that is probably key. And what I was doing in that first developer job I had did not contain anything of that. It was very like gray, boring work that 100% catered to the old fiat world. There was no like there was nothing that stimulated me in that job. So I ended up quitting after a couple of years in that, or 3 years, I think. Yeah.
And where did that take you next? I caveat that question with, sometimes working out what you don't want to do is just as important as working out what you do want to do. And that perhaps sounds like an experience similar to those, that kind of, what's the right way of saying it? That kind of context.
Yeah, I think we humans have a lot of different ways of being awake or asleep, and a lot of different ways of being wise or not wise, or intelligent or not intelligent, or experienced or not experienced. And in certain ways, I was looking back, I feel like I was very much, just a kid back then who hadn't learned a lot about myself or the world or what I wanted to do or anything. So what I kind of just, what I knew for sure was that this job is not taking me in the direction I want to go. So, and I've always been, I would say, some will call it reckless, other people will call it following through quickly when you realize something. Some will say it's brave, and some will say it's stupid. But I pretty much just went into my boss's office and said I quit one day, which was, my mom and my friends were like, what the fuck are you doing? Because this was like a very high paying job with great career opportunities, and I was doing great and everything was great. I had an apartment, I had a car, I was just, set up for the perfect fiat trajectory. So everyone was just confused, and they probably thought I was going crazy or something. And this was at a time where I was also basically learning a lot about myself, facing a lot of, like, not going to go into that a lot, but a lot of people have certain or some issues with their parents. I had a very difficult relationship with my dad, so a lot of that shit was coming to the surface, and it was a time where I felt I needed to really start to find out who the fuck I am, and do what I was meant to do. So I just quit, and I actually ended up taking work in a kindergarten, of all things.
Wow.
And I worked there for 2 years full time, just working with kids, because I really enjoyed it from the beginning. And that I learned a lot from working with kids, probably about myself. And there was something about their intuitive and just, unfiltered commentary and participation in reality, which was so opposite from what I experienced in that computer job I had. because that was very much corporate, and everyone was sitting at the lunch table. Just it felt like I was sitting around with non-player characters. And in this kindergarten, suddenly everything was so real and alive, and yeah. So I, after a couple of years, I found out that shit, I think I want to work with kids. So I started on a education to become a teacher. So I spent the next 4 or 5 years in university again, and that led me to what I will call probably my real job, which was to be a teacher. I worked as a primary school teacher for 10 years.
Wow. I love, I actually just had an interview with a friend, John, on the weekend, who's a high school teacher here in Melbourne. And it's really fun talking to people who are professionally trained teachers about how to communicate Bitcoin to people. And in John's case, he set up something here in Melbourne called Bitcoin Club. And he has basically an extracurricular class where he's created like a program, and all the kids come along and they talk about Bitcoin and they sell stuff in sats, and it's awesome to hear. I'm sure we can dive into that a bit yourself perhaps, but okay, so you became a primary teacher, probably a primary school teacher. What a journey this already is. Thank you so much for sharing it. We don't have to go in this direction, but people's relationships with their parents are very formative in all sorts of good and bad ways. Would you be willing to share perhaps your biggest lesson from the difficulties you might have had with your dad?
Yeah, I agree that it's a super interesting topic, and I think it's so formative in so many people's lives. And I think the dad-son relationship is also very, classic, and it has a lot it affects a lot how a man enters life and how he proceeds and how he ends up, I think. So I mean, for me, my dad was, he was very, I would say his mind was very much made up on what mattered in life and what didn't matter. And it was like all about a lot of very, I would say, old school mentality around how a man should be. And it, you should be rugged. You should never complain or be affected by, temperature or cutting your finger or whatever. You should be tough. And I don't think my dad died 2 years ago, unfortunately.
I'm sorry to hear that.
But I'm appreciating more and more also like how he made me, he instilled a lot of good values in me as well, which probably I resisted a lot back then. But what he was lacking, unfortunately, that affected our relationship was the ability to, give any kind of validation or praise. It was always, about critiquing and finding errors and what was not good enough. And I think that's pretty common, or at least a lot of my friends have similar experiences with their dads. So, but he instilled in me an appreciation for nature, an appreciation for hard work, and appreciation for being, a man of your word, being honest, being on time. Basically, a lot of old school values that I think are getting a little bit lost these days. Mm-hmm. So he is responsible for a lot of resilience in me, I think. And of course, the fact that our relationship was difficult also shaped me a lot in terms of standing up for myself. And, I was always very stubborn and had my own opinion on things. So yeah, he has a big influence in how I turned out, I think, and mostly positive looking back.
Thank you for sharing that. My father, in my case, actually died when I was only 20, so 13 years ago now. And
sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's what happens. You don't choose your life, you know, things just happen. And it was incredibly challenging to get past at the time. And there were, I mean, some of that really resonates with me, like just often just, you know, too critical perhaps, or constantly looking for praise that was just never there. And funnily enough, from the grave, there are still lessons. I'm smiling now. There are still things I think about on a daily basis that he taught me that I didn't realize at the time were lessons that I hold valuable now. And as you were just talking about the appreciations that you have for hard work and honesty and being on time, I've just jotted this down. You think, okay, well, it sounds kind of like proof of work. It sounds kind of like you know, indestructible blockchain, and the fact that you know, Bitcoin is in a sense a modern form of clock. And you go, whoa, okay, well, maybe that, you know, lines up nicely for where this conversation is going to head. Well, shout out to our two dads. We owe them a lot. The phase of your life as a primary school teacher, is that when Bitcoin came along, or was there another phase after that that we need to just approach first?
Bitcoin came along in my life while I was working as a teacher. Yes.
Okay.
You could say,
if I may, if we could just you know, if you could give a bit of an explanation to what life was like as a primary teacher, primary school teacher, and some of the things that you saw going on in the world, and whether they were things you were angry about or things that didn't work. And you know, you can chime back to the characteristics you mentioned as a kid, and you know, you think about, fuck, something's not quite right here. And then often when people come across Bitcoin, you've already mentioned it, you knew almost immediately from what it sounds like that it was something valuable you needed to research more. So what I'm trying to get at is the difference in mindset, you know, the day before you came across this thing, and then how it might have affected you afterwards.
Yes, I would say my experience, like when I started out as a teacher, that was probably at the very early in the accelerating wokeness and accelerating authoritarianism of our current world. Like it was before it had kind of taken hold at all in this country, at least. So my initial years as a teacher, I had a lot of autonomy and I felt a lot of trust from the organization I was in. I was able to, you know, plan and execute my classes and my weeks very much independently. Everything was working great. The parents were happy, the kids were happy, the leadership was happy. But then at an alarming pace, I would say, all of this bureaucratic bloating and reporting needs, and you know, more and more top-down control on what type of methods should be used, and you know, the message that should be put in front of the kids. And also, like, they started measuring things, you know, and then they put numbers on what they measured, and then they translated that into feedback to the teachers, even in terms of pay. You know, if your pupils tested well, that would translate into financial benefits in some way. And then it's pretty apparent to me what that does to most people in the classroom. They will start optimizing for just getting these numbers maximized, and they will not focus on all the other shit. And me, I was always driven by, you know, I wanted the kids to feel safe, to feel like valued, and to pay them respect and demand respect back. And I wanted to make critical thinkers. I wanted them to question things. I didn't want to just give them shitloads of truths from the top and say that this is how it is, just memorize it and you'll be good. I want them to think about things. And that became more and more at odds with how the organization was run. And I think that's very much like a representation of centralized structures and the fiat system. So it just, you know, at the same time I had discovered Bitcoin, and back then Bitcoin was very different from now in terms of, I mean, now I can sit and talk to you, a person I never, you know, wasn't aware of you. But
Yeah.
but
Shout out
you
to
are,
Danny for introducing us. Thank you.
yeah, but you are one of, thousands of people that share something through Bitcoin, and it's just incredibly like cool to talk to you and other Bitcoiners always, because we have shared we share Bitcoin, and by sharing Bitcoin we share so many different appreciations or insights and rabbit holes, and there's also some form of it's humbling. So I feel that most Bitcoiners are at the core humble people, and that's an important facet of it all to me. So yeah, I was ranting a bit there, but
well, a question that sprung to mind, Hodlonaut, was can you identify roughly when this seeming step change in authoritarian and centralized governance happened? And you were based in Norway, I guess, still as a teacher, and was this an influence of the European Union somehow, or just the Norwegian government itself? Because I've not entirely understood the relationship between you and the EU. So just why do you think that started happening, and when roughly was it?
Yeah, I mean, Norway is not part of the EU on paper, but we are part of the EEC. I think that's the European Economic something. It's pretty much EU. We implement almost all EU regulations, and everything from like the curvature of the bananas, and when you have to build a new standard of road in the forest, and everything is just EU stuff. But what drove the educational changes that I saw was this. It's a thing called new public management, which is that they implement basically corporate philosophy into the public sector, and it works great in a lot of areas. But the problem is, in a primary school, we're talking about kids, and you can't use a system that was made for optimizing warehouse business, and then make these kids into units in the system that you can just assign numbers to optimize the functionality. So what happened was they started measuring things, and there was this European standards. I think it was called PISA, which is they measure certain subjects and topics across Europe, and they rate the nations according to this. And I think Norwegian educational system was traditionally very strong in the sense that it wasn't authoritarian, no critical thinking, and student participation was very much encouraged, and it was a very flat organizational structure in the classrooms. The pupils were like early on asked to think for themselves and participate, basically. But with this new system, it became super important for the politicians in Norway to not lag behind. And there was like, oh, we're behind this country in math, something needs to be done, and the media played on it. And then they put in place these new systems which measured very specific things. And I think it's enormously fascinating to see what happens to human consciousness when you ask it to focus on a certain thing, and you incentivize focusing on that certain thing. I mean, what about all the uncountable other things that you then focus less on, or that you then basically tell yourself is not important? And for example, social competence, empathy, communication, standing up for yourself, all of these dimensions of being a functional social being, for example, is just being completely ignored in such a system. Also stuff like critical thinking, the increasing need to, when you consume information on the internet, how do you navigate, basically? they were instead just valuing if you answer A, B, or C on this specific question on a specific topic. And I was very worried about that, because I saw how it turned the teachers more and more into just machines that replicated what was put down from above and just put that into the pupil's head. And the more precisely it was put into the heads of the pupils, the more you were rewarded. So basically any deviance from what was decided in these documents from above, that was how you performed optimally, was to, like, as perfectly as possibly putting that information into the head of every single pupil. And to me, that's I mean, the way I put it now, it sounds like propaganda, right? That you just want to, like, brainwash people. And I would say that if you're a bad type of teacher, and this type of teacher were, like, that's basically what the system wanted, because they were the ones who got the best results, you know, on how things were measured. And if all teachers were like that, that's a pretty dystopian society, I think. If the school's only mandate is to perfectly put the ruling political parties' doctrines into the heads of pupils, that's not good. And that's the tendency that I started seeing. Of course, it's not like all pupils in Norway are getting brainwashed at all, but I would say that the single most important factor in a child's education is the person they are lucky or unlucky enough to have as a teacher. And I was a teacher for 10 years, and I think I put a lot of absolutely revolutionary madness into the minds of some of these people in what I see as a good way. But of course, some other people would, like, just shake their heads and what is this guy even doing? He needs to get with the program.
Well, and I can imagine that as the system becomes more as you describe, i.e. this kind of centralized planning approach in which certain things are being highlighted and therefore optimized for, your incentive structure is altering over time. And if you are an outlier and not willing to move in that direction, then it was probably quite challenging, actually, I imagine, like in the school staff room or wherever you might have been. And people are like, what's wrong with this guy? He's just not with it. This doesn't make any sense. And there's probably even parents that push back against certain techniques you may have been using at the time. Did that happen at all, or am I just kind of making things up?
I think your thoughts are valid. What happened in my specific case, I mean, I had the parents were correct me if I'm wrong, any parents listening to this, but they were very happy. I mean, okay. I had this one class for 7 years straight, and we felt like a family almost. Everyone knew each other well. It was
wow.
It was really good, and I will probably continue looking back at my work as a teacher as, like, what some of the best stuff that I did in this world, and some of the most meaningful and important stuff I did in this world, because it felt extremely real and meaningful, and I put my heart and my soul into it.
Wow, awesome. And this is, I mean, perhaps this is a rabbit hole for another day, but I love the idea that with the invent of the internet, information has become, infinitely cheaper than it ever was before, and the very concept of education is rapidly evolving. Bitcoin, there's no MBA, there's no degree. You have to go out there and you have to find all the information and learn it yourself. And the idea that more student-led philosophies are going to blossom, we're going to be more decentralized. You won't have to go to these Ivy League schools in the States or wherever else you might aim to get into. What we know as education is rapidly evolving, and hopefully for the better. I mean, the idea of, like, making a kid extremely specialized from a very young age in order to jump through a bunch of loopholes that some central planner has set seems absolute madness, versus let them basically play all day long with their friends, except for 2 hours in which they jump online and focus on a subject they absolutely love. like yourself, all the way back as a 10-year-old. Imagine if you'd been able to do, engineering full time from then, which was your passion. Like, who knows what may have come from that. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole though. Excuse my rant. Bitcoin comes along at some point during this process. You've explained brilliantly how your view of the world was slightly changing, and what was happening around you specifically was changing. Who first introduced Bitcoin to you, and how quickly did you realize it was something that you really wanted to focus your energy and attention on as much as you do today?
Yeah, I found Bitcoin. I had no one in my life that knew about Bitcoin, and it was a very random encounter. I was reading some tech magazine. I can't remember which. It was just an article that had a reference to Bitcoin, and somehow that reference was made that it like piqued my interest. So I searched it, and I found the white paper pretty much immediately, and I read the white paper. And I'm not going to claim that I understood all the implications of the white paper, but I understood some of it. I understood the censorship resistance part. I understood the peer-to-peer part, because I was, as I said, familiar with how BitTorrent works, and the power of that, how no one could like fuck with it. You could just keep sharing, and as long as if you were behind a VPN or something, I mean, you were completely fine. And that just, it really blew my mind. So from then on, from that first day, I considered myself a Bitcoiner.
Wow.
Not that I mean, it's been an increasing intensity, of course. And I mean, Bitcoin has continued to prove itself all the fucking time. Because back then, some of the things that made me like, that didn't like completely add up, or it was like the governance part of it. Who are these people writing the code? How are they, like, basically the consensus part of everything, because Bitcoin was so small back then.
When are we talking exactly?
2013.
Wow.
And okay. And yeah, it's wild to think back how different. I was scouring Reddit. I was scouring Bitcoin Talk. I was, generally, looking for anything related to Bitcoin or even blockchain. Back then, crypto and blockchain weren't swear words yet, as they have become. But there was, you could read everything new that happened in 20 minutes, and then the rest of your day was just, fuck, I wish there was something more Bitcoin related to consume.
Wow. Versus today, when there's just well, if you look, there is a huge amount of information out there that you can consume. And I've got a to-do, read, or to watch, or to listen list that's, I never get through it. It's as simple as that. There's always something else to learn.
I think back then you could be on top of everything that happened, and then I mean, like, new companies happening, the development cycle, pretty much everything you could be on top of. But today, even if you're just interested in mining, and you ignore everything else in Bitcoin, still there is too much happening only in mining that you can completely be on top of everything. So it's really been exponential.
And so you mentioned that you were worried about the governance. What I'm intrigued with here is, obviously, Bitcoin has changed. It's irrecognizable from 2013. I really like it when you hear people talking about how Bitcoin today as an investment is better than it ever has been, even though the price is effectively higher than it's ever been, in that the risk is significantly reduced and adoption rates have got to where they are, et cetera, et cetera. You can make a very good case for that. But when you say you were worried about governance, like, what did that mean at the time? And what has since happened that has made you more confident that that's no longer an issue?
Yeah, I think my worry, I wouldn't even call them worries. I would call them like some of the things like I felt like I didn't completely understand. But looking back, it was a worry because there was no clear. No one could have told me like very clearly how this was gonna work back then. I think it feels like this was an experiment involving very esoteric elements of consensus, trust, and stuff like that. In like 2017 was amazing with the attacks, the blockchain wars, as it has been called by some. And I think I find the same phenomenon, you know, in the Bitcoin community as a whole, like how my own map of Bitcoin in terms of the participants, how that is shaped and adjusted with every interaction through a very very rich fabric of trust existing in the community. And as you said very early on in this conversation, something like, it's fascinating, like how if someone gives you a piece of information, you will value that piece of information based on how much you trust the person who gave it to you. And back then, my perceived worry was basically pretty much, you know, what if some state agency contacts one of these developers or all of the developers and tell them you need to do this and that, or you will put you in a dungeon. It seemed centralized to me, you know. And what's changed since then is of course a lot about, there has been certain or many different social attacks. A lot of vectors have been attempted in terms of co-opting Bitcoin. We had highly trusted members of the Bitcoin community, like Gavin Andresen, for example. You know, he basically got the torch from Satoshi in terms of overlooking the experiment, and he turned absolutely bad apple in my eyes, and in most Bitcoiners' eyes, even going as far as saying that, you know, Craig Wright is Satoshi and backing the whole big block agenda. And you had Roger Ver, super influential, like the biggest person in Bitcoin back in the beginning, also put everything he had, all his energy and resources into destroying Bitcoin, in my opinion, because he wanted to make the blocks really big and centralizing the whole thing. So Bitcoin has somehow fought back against all of these attacks, and part of what has changed, I think, is that, you know, I think it's hard to concisely explain how consensus works in Bitcoin to a lay person and maybe to anyone. So it's almost like the magic construction of Bitcoin has time and again proven to just work. You know, it's somehow something about the incentive structures and the extreme transformative potential of Bitcoin that makes people defend it like it was their own child almost. And somehow this fabric of trust works in this community in a way that the good voices and the true voices are somehow win over the false narratives. Which this is a very fascinating subject to me, and this trust, how trust works in Bitcoin between participants is, in my eyes, key to even what Bitcoin is, you know, because in many ways Bitcoin is also the sum of all of these social fabrics that exist.
Wow, and so many questions spring to mind. It's fascinating hearing you explain these thoughts and this, like, let's say, milestones that you've experienced during this process. For those of us that weren't as closely kind of tapped into the Bitcoin space back in 2013 and 2014, 15, 16, even to 2017 with the blockchain war, what do you think it was that, you know, if you had to choose a couple of things or just one thing, that to me it's like the small guy won in a great way, and people seem to, like, even in secret, support that, and that's why the block size was never increased, and that's why these kind of centralized instincts of major players in the space got defeated. Is it just this incentive structure that's in play that, in a weird way, it's like a living being, isn't it? There's a kind of there's a new force in the world that exists that never did before, that gets all of these people to converge on one place, and then, as you mentioned, defend it with their life. Like, what the hell is that? Have we ever seen anything like this before? And in the studies that you've done over the years, like, what do you think it is that makes it that? It's a very vague question, sorry, but I'm intrigued to dig a little further into your thought process.
Yeah, I mean, there is a word that pops up a lot in my mind when I think about Bitcoin, just both from my own perspective and from what I observe. And that word is conviction. And I think, you know, if you have a mind that is tuned into, you just want the truth, you want truth, you want, because you know that you need truth to build something lasting. To build on lies is just, you know, a very high time preference. In my eyes, completely meaningless exercise. So the longer you spend in Bitcoin, the more you see that, you know, it works. You can run your own node. You can verify everything yourself. You see one example first, maybe, of some, it could be like something inspired or brave or from another Bitcoiner that, you know, adds one stone at a time to this. I call it a muscle, you know, a conviction muscle that just grows stronger all the time from the sum of what you observe and experience in Bitcoin. And the longer you spend in Bitcoin, the stronger this conviction muscle is. And every time a new Bitcoiner is added and thrown down the rabbit hole, you have a new conviction muscle starting to grow. And the sum of all this conviction that is in Bitcoin now, and that it grows all the fucking time, and it doesn't diminish, because once you see the light in Bitcoin, once you get orange pilled, you don't get un-orange pilled, you know. You can, some people unfortunately fall for greed, so they lie to themselves and the people around them for personal gain, which is very sad for them. And I think it's something they will come to regret for the rest of their lives when they realize what they actually did, and that they basically fell for the dark side, I would say. But the conviction and the, like, they can lie for themselves, but the conviction is it's still there. And yeah, I think that's it for me. That there is so, and that's like the biological side of Bitcoin, or the human side of Bitcoin, which can't be underestimated. I think that just this enormous consciousness field that's become global and just keeps increasing in strength. That's ultra fascinating to me,
isn't it? And it's that phrase consciousness in connection with the kind of the conviction muscle. So it's like this shared consciousness is itself a muscle and is growing and growing and growing. And just a small aside, I've never done weight training on a regular basis, but started in the last year, and it's absolutely extraordinary how quickly your body reacts, gets stronger and improves. And it's super similar to what you're describing, that phrase, a muscle, right? You break it down and it gets stronger, you break it down, it gets stronger. And that's what we're seeing here. Like this whole thing about tulip mania, right? Tulips don't come back 10x more valuable than the previous time. Like, come on, didn't happen. And it's another example as to how this is, you know, something that really people should take notice of. I think what always strikes me as interesting is the certain type of character that sits down and has a look and goes, this is interesting. Or maybe they get touched, you know, 4, 3, 2 times. I don't know exactly. Everyone's a bit different, but they have a kind of a unique, let's say, skill set or multidisciplinary understanding that they pull together and suddenly go, this is interesting, you know, and in they go. Oh, how cool. Well, thank you so much for explaining all that. I'm loving it. So I'd love to touch on a couple of things that we've briefly mentioned at the start of the conversation. So I guess you never imagined you'd be running a media business. Talk to us a little about Citadel 21 and how that came about. Ultimately you've gone down the entrepreneurship route in that sense. So yeah, I'd love to learn some more.
Yeah. I guess me and Katja don't look at it as a business even. It's more like for us it's like a project, a tribute to Bitcoin, I would say, and a tribute to Bitcoiners. But of course it is a business, but it's not something that we have optimized for profit at all. There is basically no profit in it for us at the moment, at least.
And if I may, on that point, similarly to education in some senses, media businesses are paid, generally speaking, by advertisers, and advertisers are therefore their customers. So out of every single one of the stakeholders that they hold most important, it's not the reader or the user of said information that they're sharing with their networks. It's actually, is the customer happy or not, yes or no? And that bias inevitably leads to a sense of corruption in terms of the message that said media company can produce, because they are hamstrung by who pays them, basically. So this idea that a media business can exist that isn't under that same incentive structure, that's really interesting. Is that part of your thoughts, perhaps?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
Talk to me a bit more about that.
It absolutely is. And I mean, we don't have any advertisers at all. Our only income is the Satoshis paid by our customers to receive the magazine. And as a result, I mean, it was never on the table for us to make any compromise at all, like zero. And even to the point that we have a circular Bitcoin economy. We pay all our, like the printing, the shipping, the design work, all of that is paid in Bitcoin from our side. And the only way to purchase our magazines is by paying us in Bitcoin. And we had a lot of people asking, like, why don't you accept the fiat? You would sell more magazines. And that's true. We would sell more magazines, but we also would not stay 100% focused on what we wanted to do with this magazine, which was not to cater to the average, like the mainstream at all. We wanted to cater to a hardcore Bitcoin community. And that's what we've done. And I think the product is really hardcore. It's savage as fuck. It's like we don't have an editorial group of people going through all the articles. Like, is this acceptable? Is this? I mean, I am the editor of this publication, and if I think it's cool, it will get published. And I think it's cool if the article is, feels authentic and brings some inspiration to the table in some way. So it's been really rewarding to work on this, and it's a great way to meet a lot of really interesting Bitcoiners, and it's really cool to see people who never had their thoughts presented to a wider audience, to put them in the magazine and have other people read their thoughts, with the only merit here being what their words contained, not how big of an influencer they are, or because most of our articles are written by plebs with 120 followers on Twitter, and that awesome. No one heard about before.
Yeah, awesome. And every single one of those, as I keep kind of chiming on about, has a unique lens on what Bitcoin is to them.
Yes.
And that's what I find so fascinating. And that's one of the inspirations for doing this podcast.
It's like we had people approach Bitcoin from so many perspectives. Like you say, some come at it from being interested in permaculture, and then they apply all the principles of permaculture and find synchronicities with Bitcoin. You have people into Brazilian jiu-jitsu, people working as doctors, people from the financial side financial world. And it's really cool to see the sum of all these perspectives when people have been orange pilled.
Well, I must spend some more time on the website and have a dig through it. I have certainly consumed a couple of Croesus's essays that I think are often excellent.
Yeah,
he's
great.
Particularly the article that he wrote about
the yuppie elite.
The yuppie elite, yeah.
It
describes like half my friends. Simple as
yes.
that. Maybe more of them, actually. 75% of them. It's really on point, that. So shout out to them for writing. So you touched on a lawsuit. I don't want to spend too much time on this, as it felt like a negative subject, but having brought it up, I'd love to just learn a little more about that. So what's happened?
Yeah, I would definitely say it's a negative subject. There is like no upside to it for me personally, apart from, staying true to my own integrity. Because very short story of it is that Craig Wright had his lawyers go after me in 2019. I was pseudonymous. No one knew who I was. But he threatened, if I didn't do what he wanted, he would set into effect measures to, de-anonymize me. And he demanded that I go into a court of law and testify that I was wrong to say that he is not Satoshi, and I apologize to him, and I now have changed my mind that he is Satoshi, and so on, And that was just not on the table for me. I felt like I couldn't, betray myself and I would say the Bitcoin community by doing that, just to get out of this pinch. So then he actually put a bounty on my identity. He said they made an article, and they had some pictures of my arms, my tattoos, and they were like, look out for this guy. There's $5,000 bounty for anyone who can find out who he is. And there were private investigators involved, and they managed to find out my identity and start legal proceedings against me for defamation in the UK.
Wow. And where is that going, do you think? I mean, I guess you don't know. You're still being dragged through the courts.
It's lasted for over 3 years, which is absolutely insane to me that's even possible over, a couple of harmless tweets from a small Twitter account.
Yeah.
Had no impact whatsoever on his reputation. So
it's aggressive. It's really aggressive.
It's really bad. But where it's going, I'm still fighting it. It's really stressful. And it's, of course, the stakes are super high. If worst case scenario for me is to go personally bankrupt and lose everything I have.
Wow.
So it's something I have to deal with, and I really don't want to make a victim out of myself. My own thoughts on this is, this is what I was dealt, and now I just I can't control the outcome, but I can control how I play, and how I look on it, and I can also control that I will not feel, like a victim no matter what happens. I'm happy to be able to have the integrity to do what is right for me.
Well, from the bottom of my heart, very best of luck with that process. If there's anything I've learned during this conversation, integrity is something that is front of mind with everything you seem to have done with your lifetime so far. So I'm sure that good will win. And equally, it occurs to me a story I saw recently. I actually haven't checked to see if this is 100% true, but Andreas Antonopoulos, very influential educator for a lot of people who joined the Bitcoin scene, let's say 2014, 15, 16. And recently there was a story about the fact that, he wasn't actually a very wealthy man. And in a very short space of time, Bitcoiners had sent him like $1 million worth of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And I would not be surprised if there was a similar community feedback for someone like yourself. If anything was to ever happen along these lines, which
Mhm.
really is a signal of not only all of the hard work you've done to get to today and the story you're telling, but also this incredible community that one finds themselves within on adopting this new technology. Old mate Craig Wright is a fraud, and it's very obvious. And I really hope that there's not many more people that end up in situations like this as well, and that there's a positive outcome for yourself. At which point, I'd like to just to move on to what's my last question for the conversation. What does the future have in store, do you think? How does Bitcoin look 5 or 10 years from now? What gets you most excited about looking forwards?
Yeah, I just have to end.
And if you want to go back, by all means.
I just wanted to say that because you mentioned the community, and I'm already just super impressed and thankful for all the support that I've had from the community, and it's been really important for me.
Awesome. Well, shout out to all those people.
Yeah, shout out to Bitcoiners. What's in store for Bitcoin? All I know, I like, as a general rule, sometimes you just know that you don't know the details. Like for me personally, I can say the attacks on the towers in the US in 2001, 9/11, for me, that's very obviously didn't happen the way the official narratives say it happened, but I don't know exactly how it happened. All I know is that something was very off there. And in terms of Bitcoin, I feel absolutely certain deep inside that Bitcoin will win, that we will have a world running on Bitcoin. That's something it seems like it can't not happen because of how Bitcoin works and the incentive structures. But I think it will be a rocky road to get there. I think we're seeing the start of more and more weaponized attacks on Bitcoin. Probably the ESG narrative is going to be the biggest one, I think. And I'm seeing, European banks having carbon footprint in their bank statements next to people's transactions. Couple that with the CBDCs that they seem hell-bent on introducing. So it increasingly looks like Bitcoin is the shining star and the greatest weapon for people wanting to fight authoritarianism and protect themselves from it. While the authoritarians will, of course, use everything in their arsenal to prevent Bitcoin from winning. So I think it will be a rocky road. It's going to be really interesting to see how this partially engineered global collapse is going to play out, and how fast Bitcoin as a lifebuoy will be adopted by nations and people. I think it's really hard for me to say more than that. What I'm observing is an exponentially increasing amount of Bitcoiners entering from where I'm observing, and so many brilliant people and so many driven people and so many people that I know are willing to go really far to fight for Bitcoin, and they so strongly believe in it, this conviction muscle, as I mentioned. So I'm very positive. I'm confident that Bitcoin will win, but I have no idea how fast it will happen or how brutal that fight is going to be.
It's funny, isn't it? Bitcoin is, all of us guilty of we think we can see the future. We're just not quite sure how it plays out. And it's that kind of like, it's almost on your fingertips. You can feel it.
Yeah.
You just don't know how you're going to get there. Well, Hodlonaut, thank you so much for your time today. I couldn't appreciate more the story you've told and all the information you've shared. So thank you. Last point, where can people get hold of you if they want to?
They can find me on Twitter at Hodlonaut. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I mean, my DMs are open. And I guess the other contact point is my Citadel 21 company. So check out citadel21.com. It's possible to reach out on the website if you want to contribute, or yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining today. I've absolutely loved learning about your journey. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jake.
Pleasure.